And we're rolling. Welcome, everybody, to the Patreon episode of the RINO podcast. We have a very special guest with us today, Justin Lee. He is, according to his Twitter bio, I hope it's updated, Justin, associate editor of Arc Digital. Has also worked at Vice, Independent, and First Things Magazine. Do I have that right? Is that fully updated?
Yeah, and by work at, I mean I've written for, but no official title or anything like that for any of the places.
Did you get paid for what you wrote?
Yeah,
Well, then that
yeah.
counts in my book.
Okay.
That's if you're a published author. Where do you write mostly? I mean, what for how frequently?
I try to get an article out twice a month.
Okay.
But it depends on what I'm working on. Sometimes it's more regular than that. Other times it's not, and it's really long articles that take a ton of research. I tend to, I really suck at writing straight columns. They want to turn into research papers, and so that's often what happens. And I'll usually have to run something a longer form.
I think I've read some of your stuff in First Things Mag. Nothing
Mm.
for Vice necessarily. What does Vice ask you, or do you
Well,
kind of
I've
just
only
submit
I've
to?
only published with them once. It was actually fiction.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
I actually kind of throw that into the profile as bait to confuse people. Um, I had somebody comment once that the overlap between Vice and First Things writers has to be, a Venn diagram of one person.
I was going to say, yeah, Vice is usually. um, I mean, well, actually, back in the day,
They used to be
um, they
amazing.
used to be really good, edgy. I mean, guerrilla journalism that was
Mhm.
really got in there, and then somewhere, in the middle of the Obama years, they just flipped, and I think
Yeah.
look, Gavin McGinnis left, and Shane, what's his face, took over,
Yeah.
and they took a hard left Canadian turn,
Yeah.
and
Well, and even deep into that turn, they used to do some really great stuff that was often incredibly moral.
mm,
Like they had this, when they were on HBO, they had this tremendous documentary on human surrogacy in India, just heartbreaking stuff, and they treated it honestly. And but yeah, it's like everything else. I think once we hit the Trump years, all the latent crazy just came to the surface and won the day.
mm. So we interact a lot on Twitter, the three of us, and I'm pulling back on Twitter just because, quite simply, I don't have as much time as I used to, which I think
Uh,
is a good thing, a healthy thing for me anyway. Even though I'm consumed with with lots of other stuff going on. But I wanted to have you on this episode for the Patreon for our subscribers to get into some deep in the bubble conservatism stuff.
mhm,
And since you write for First Things Mag,
mhm,
um, we've been following it here for quite some time. The opening shots where it really got interesting was when Sohrab Ahmari took on David French, and
mhm.
his approach to conservatism, and really sort of wrecked him.
Yeah.
In like
Yep.
a year or two ago. Um, to I'd say some glaring blind spots for me anyway that I didn't see. Maybe I wasn't looking for them or didn't care to. I do have to live in the real world. I am not lucky enough
Yeah.
to write in the ideological journals to
Mhm.
get to for a living, even though that would be fun for to do so. Um,
Mhm.
but well, first, before we get into that, I guess that's really the opening salvo of where all this started from where I'm sitting, or why we're talking about it. What did you think about Sorab's take on David? And do you have, I mean,
Yeah. And I've written on this a little bit, and what longer article when this first happened was title is "Conservatism and Its Discontents." I ran with ARC, and um, if you can hear my roommates, let me know, and I'll put headphones on.
it's okay.
But yeah, so I think that I have some reservations about some of the tone of Sorob's attacks, um, but the substance is spot on. He I don't think that there is a single point in that debate that um, that French was able to win on the merits. Um, he and a lot of that has to do with really an inability to understand post-liberal criticism of liberalism, and a complete unfamiliarity with metaphysics
Mm.
and how to grapple with the claim that coherent politics require a coherent metaphysics underpinning them.
Would
And go
to
ahead.
yeah to I won't use the cliched unpack that a little bit,
Yeah,
as they say. But could you talk a little bit more um, about? I mean, the coherent the
yeah,
what's your view of the coherent underpinnings?
yeah. So it's easier to talk about what's not coherent at first. Um, so Reagan fusionism was radically incoherent as a coalition. You know, if it was completely billed as here's a coalition of um, somewhat discongruous perspectives that are bound together, for the sake of expedience, then that's perfectly fine. But it really became this, fusionism became this kind of ideology of its own, where, and this was true for me when I was younger. I just assumed that free market absolutism and social conservatism and and a somewhat more aggressive foreign policy were all kind of this unified thing that if you believed in one, you should probably believe in the others. And and one of the things that um, Trump made possible, for all of his defects, he made it possible to challenge that assumption, within conservatism in a really big, robust way. And I think once the cat was out of the bag, it was over because the incongruence between these different positions um, is pretty insurmountable. The free market stuff actually undercuts social conservatism pretty radically. It conditions populations to view the human body, for example, as property, um, to be dispensed with, as one wills.
Do you mean that in
And
respect to what's going on now with like vaccines? So, talk about that, because for
yeah,
me this is where I guess for the folks who have like you said, I think when the fusionism argument starts to fall apart, whether it splits foreign policy, economic policy, and social conservatism, like if you want to call those the three pillars, uh,
mm-hmm.
I start to get especially with economic policy. I have an open mind, and I'm willing to listen on foreign
Yeah,
policy. Right? I don't think
mm-hmm.
anybody can say when the past 50 to 70, 80 years, you can say that there's been some absolute correct way to do it. But economic policy, I think I start to push back
Mm-hmm.
on those aspects, because I don't know that the people who are advocating for it are as close to it seeing, I'd say the advancement of humankind. So when you say people are your what was your phrase, as property, your
Yeah, yeah, that it conditions us to think in a very narrow set of terms, metaphysically even, and it's and this is not to say capitalism is bad. I think it's generally a good thing. It just has to have human limits set on it, and but there is this reflexive idea that um, that everything is the same kind of thing. And this is just downstream of a materialist modern order. So it might be possible to have a much more robust free market in the pre-modern era that isn't dehumanizing in the same ways. But late capitalism is downstream of the normalization of a materialist worldview within the political sphere. And so there's this flattening effect where difference is effaced, and people are much more easily seen as goods, just like consumer goods, or property, just like consumer goods.
What do you think is an example of that? So for clarity for the audience and for even for myself.
So almost everything that came out of the sexual revolution is a direct consequence of this worldview. And so, abortion treats the human body as property. And it's like uprooting a tree in your backyard. And you can make an argument for that, that view of things, but it's not a, go ahead.
Well, I do think that there's a valid point that the concept that we treat our body as property and the aspects of it hitting the sexual revolution. Maybe I'm missing it. Explain why that would be more economic.
I can speak on this, because if we're speaking on the subject of abortion within maybe your body becoming a commodity and private property, we just saw two women testify before Congress that if you take away abortion, that you're doing violence against their bodies. And so that the concept is that they can kill their baby because they treat their body as an economic being, and it's essentially their property. Do you see what I'm saying? So it takes it out of the moralistic argument into a private property argument.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just saying we've devolved from the sexual revolution with like abortion, from like Roe versus Wade into safe, legal, rare, and now violence against bodies. I think that we're downwardly spiraling into. Well, that's my personal opinion, but yeah.
I think so. The underlying the concepts of free market or freer, maybe this is a commoditization of ourselves, leading to the moral decay. I think if you follow it, I think it's more in. I think the justification, it's a little bit flipped. Where the excuse, right, is more on economic or using economic language and economic grounds necessarily than the economic concepts behind it float the idea of abortion. I think that language and the argument is used to justify it, not necessarily do it. But I could see the connection.
Well, think about it like this. This is something that connects to the post-liberal critique. And this is something that that David French very meticulously avoids ever talking about. And it's that our constitutional system has some moral content, but not a lot of moral content. It depends on there being a prior moral norm within society that provides the content of the form of government that we have. And so if that moral content changes, then we kind of have this constitutional superstructure that can be used in radically different ways given the content that's imported into it. And political economy works in a very similar way. Depending on the nature of the citizenry, it's going to be expressed in different ways, even if the principles are on the surface identical.
The idea that our constitutional system, I think the pillar, right, the unseen pillar behind it is that we are a moral people, right? The moral people will be in the branches of government that are set up. And if that starts to erode and decay, then what happens to the structure around it? It can't exist without the underpinning of a moral framework. And where does that moral framework come from? So yeah, I guess you can erode it outside of politics, though. Do you think? I mean, is that, or do you think politics is more eroding it, or social conventions? And to put it more in the historian, who's the guy who writes for the Globe, historian Neil Ferguson, right? Germs and guns and germs, or guns and butter, not guns and butter.
Guns, germs,
guns, germs. Yeah, that's it. Sorry, but right. So where the idea is, yeah, okay, you could make the argument that like Enlightenment thinking is where it all started to go wrong, and there's a case for a lot of that, but also. The invention of birth control, right? The invention of sanitary napkins for for women in the early 20th century, late 19th century, like all these things that like sort of started feminism as we know it today, and kind of got us out of the industrial revolution. The invention of the car, right? People didn't have to, they could drive away to have fun and hook up. So I kind of went on a little bit of a tangent there. Sorry. But to bring it back, how much of the political aspects of it do you think are reining that in? I think there's probably more social. I don't think the politicians are ahead of the time. I think our moral society is affected in huge ways outside of politics, and maybe even outside of thinking and ideology.
Well, I mean, I want to believe that that the answer is entirely social, that it's entirely cultural, and I think that the only way that happens is if there is a map, is if there's a third great awakening. That's just about the only way that culture can change swiftly enough, radically enough, with enough substance that that I think they could overpower the current trajectory that we're on, and halt it without using the formal mechanisms of government.
And I'd agree. I'm pessimistic about that third great awakening happening. I'm very cynical. I think I was, Kaitlin, last episode, I've been very cynical about a lot of things lately, but I'm very cynical about that taking place because of the cultural rot that's going on. To say what's causing it now compared to say 50 to 100 years ago, I think there's a clear case of there's an agenda behind what's pushing it now, right? It's not so much, the invention of, or some art or music or automobile or, some scientific invention pushing it forward. And now it's definitely political or ideological.
And it's been a long top-down revolution, beginning in the late 50s, early 60s, that has really, it's become much more aggressive recently because I think it's getting some very significant challenges thrown at it. And if you take Hannah Arendt's idea that that the relationship between power and violence is that violence only appears when power is threatened or when power is slipping, and so the coercion that we see emerging from the left is a response to a sense that their position is not as strong as they thought it would be. And so in that sense, there are reasons to hope, at least very narrowly.
I think there's reasons to hope. I don't want to sound too pessimistic, I guess.
Well, I'll pessimism pessimism you right out of the room. It's don't get me going on,
Well,
Renee Girard.
I mean, as conservatives, we love to complain a lot. Oh, the media this, the media that. But the truth, I look at it, and maybe from a few months ago, oh, this person gets banned from Twitter, or they're throttling us down, or they're restricting this, and they're shadow banning that. I'm like, yeah, why? Because we're winning.
Yeah.
Half, Biden's president, but half the country did not vote that way, right? The cool kids now are not on Saturday Night Live. The dorks are.
Yep.
The cool, the dorks are in the Democratic Party, and the musicians that kiss Obama's ass. They're not cool anymore. They're not edgy. They are the establishment. They are mainstream. And you see that culturally now. I mean, I agree that there needs to be some moral center behind it, but there is a pushback from that sense. So I don't know about the Third Great Awakening, but I do know that there is call it a counter-revolution, right? Taking
well,
place.
and so what I'm saying about a Third Great Awakening is that, that's what it would take for us to be able to do kind of old school, small government, hands-off conservatism, in response to the current moment. If a Great Awakening were to happen, then we could have the luxury of holding those principles dear, regarding our relationship to the use of power in the state. But we absolutely don't have that luxury, and so, which is why people like Sohrab Ahmari are calling for strategic uses of the state within constitutional bounds, to rein in the excesses that we see everywhere.
What do you think about related to what you just said, Adrian Vermeule's, I guess, call it project, right, with Cass Sunstein to take over the bureaucracy and seek the common good through the bureaucracy? So one thing about this, both Sohrab and Adrian and some other, and Patrick Deneen, who've put this forward, and I'm open, I'm listening. I'm not, going to dismiss it off its face. But I've yet to hear real specifics, right? I've yet to hear, please tell me, how do you implement this? I'm in the real world. I'm in business. I've said, I think I said this to Kaitlin, I'm fine with a government full of Catholics, but I don't know if I'm fine with a Catholic government, right? So there's this distinction that tell me what they're going to do, and okay, I'll go thumbs up or thumbs down accordingly. And I've yet to hear too many specifics with related to that. I mean, I'd love to ban Drag Queen Story Hour. I think we're all on board with that. But then, I hear Pope Francis talking about the greed greed causes people to go hungry, and I go, hang on a second here. The free market has actually made it, so that people
just show them the elephant curve and tell them to go pray for a while.
So where do you fall on that? With what specifics have you seen? Do you or do you agree with what that project entails?
So I agree with most of that project, but I will emphasize that it's not just one project. So Sohrab and Adrian have differing perspectives. I think Adrian is a bit more bullish on the resurgence of Catholicism than Sohrab is. Sohrab is, he'll openly say that, I'm not, when I am pursuing integralism, I'm not actually pursuing a Catholic government. He wants to see the existing constitutional system significantly leavened by Catholic moral principle. And that's a radically different thing than wanting to see the dividing wall between church and state fall down. And even if that dividing wall is really a construction of the early 20th century, and has very little to do with the founding principles of this country. I mean, we had state churches, until the end of the 19th century, receiving state subsidies. That was okay with the founders. That was within the bounds of the First Amendment, and only revisionists say otherwise. And so, a much closer wedding than what we're comfortable with is within constitutional bounds. And but regarding concrete policy ideas, Patrick Deneen has actually put forward a lot of great ideas. He has a great lecture that he did at a First Things conference, and I think they subsequently published. The title is Aristopopulism, and so some of the suggestions that he has, have to do with taking a decentralized approach to power in the Acela corridor. So we have so much, power consolidated in Washington. When we do not need to have all these, administrative hubs in the same location. We can spread them throughout the country, and that decentralizes power. That means that, people get out of their Ivy League to government bubble and have to actually exist with their fellow citizens in a way that they have not for decades.
Remember when Trump forced, was it Department of Interior bureaucrats to move to the federal employees, move them to actual, their states where they're going to be? Was it Department of Interior? I'm fair, or Homeland? It was something that had to do with parks.
I only vaguely remember. I think parks are through the Interior
Department. Yeah, there was a major media freak out about this one move of moving them out of DC and actually going to states like Montana, which they take care of in DC.
Yeah.
Instead of living in Montana and actually taking care of what they need to do and being present for the people of the United States. But I do agree with that position that we need to decentralize almost DC and move these federal agents out to the states, because everything is very centralized around DC. And look at how that concentration in the Acela, especially DC, has even changed Virginia state politics. That's exactly what happened.
Yeah. And it's and spreading that out is going to have such a powerful effect over time, because
government, if we're paying for it.
Yeah, well, and it's going to humanize the bureaucracy in a way that it needs to be humanized, and I think that is in some ways what Vermeulen has in mind. It's not just importing Catholics into the bureaucracy, but it's changing the status quo, which is the permanent bureaucracy is monolithically Democrat. And the groupthink is, all the moral depredations of the Democratic Party aside, you don't want one party having a monopoly over the bureaucracy, because groupthink just means stasis. It means an impossibility of any kind of progress. And it means bloat. It means waste of money.
I'd agree with Patrick Deneen's, decentralized approach and implementing that into a lot of the bureaucracy. I take a deep breath with Adrian Vermeulen's approach to using the government agencies, because one, he wrote that book with Cass Sunstein, who his nudge approach to getting people to, do what they want. Let's just nudge them in the right direction. I think there's a whiff of social engineering behind it. And I could be wrong. I'm fine. That example,
you're right. You're right.
I'd rather blow up the bureaucracy in a not a literal sense. Don't want to get banned on YouTube. But in the I'd rather shrink it to where it doesn't need to exist, because it probably doesn't need to exist. And I think seeding the idea that, oh, well, it's just going to be there forever, no sense. Let's just try to get our guys in there this time instead of that. I mean, okay, that's, you're resigned to the fact that it can become even more more powerful, right?
All governing is social engineering. You cannot govern without socially engineering. And so any change in government, even if it is to dismantle the bureaucracy, is a form of social engineering. The question is just, what is a proper use of social engineering? What is a humane use that doesn't reject human nature, but embraces and tries to embellish what is good in our polity? And we can't get around it. There's no neutral action.
So I saw some of the, I think it was Sorab, or it was Sorab in this, and, who defines the good, right? Mm-hmm. And I know it was like, oh, well, who defines? It was kind of like a condescending, well, because you've heard this before, right? The reply, and it was, well, in the small caps or small caps, who decides what is good. But yeah, actually, I kind of want to know that, who decides what is good.
Well,
I think it's
right
real important, right?
Progressive consensus.
Yeah, and that can flip. And I think when I'm happy with there, like I said, kind of alluding to like the Pope Francis thing. I think that when people interact with government, it's not very often, right? It didn't used to be. Your general daily interaction with government is maybe driving on the roads. You don't deal with it a lot, but the rules they set up certainly affect your life in in how you live, in the jobs you can have, how much money you take home, where your kids go to school. All of those, hundreds and hundreds of different decisions are impacted that way. So one person's conception of what is good, maybe a larger welfare state, right? Because we need to help people. People are down on their luck. Let's be charitable, but let's force that charity and create a larger, more robust welfare state. Or people need health care, so let's have the government do that. I think there's that populist argument where it's bleeding a little too away from more of the fusionist one that says, no, hang on, guys, you may think that, but actually it doesn't work well. It literally does not function well. We need to remove that, and I'm pretty staunch on this, where we need to remove these aspects from the control of the government and do it. So
what's really at stake there, though, is if you're arguing that position, as a fusionist, you're ultimately have in mind the same common good, because it's about it's about what is the best way for people to receive this good, this shared good, and so we're talking about divergent means for the same ends. And so we're not talking about actually a divergence in understanding the common good. We're talking about something else, and we're really talking about varying degrees of pragmatism. What is the most effective way to achieve these common ends that we already agree on? I think that there was a time when a much more free market approach to healthcare was way more effective, where we could have much more broadly accessible, cheaper healthcare. I don't know that we live in that world anymore. The problem is, I don't think we live in a world where we could ever afford single payer, and so it's a question of what policy will produce the least harm at this point, as opposed to what policy will get us closer to the good. And
that's an interesting point, especially with single payer, that our system is too complex, where if we were to rip it apart and do something like single payer, it would cause that much detrimental harm to our country, right? I mean, Canada did their switch early 2010s. Am I correct on that? And I don't think ours is just too complex. We can't do single payer. Like, yeah, well, itself would drown us.
Yeah, and we would assuredly default on our sovereign debt. And
oh yeah.
And people don't understand the kind of disaster that is. That it's. I mean, it'll be apocalyptic, and which is why these spending bills right now, like it's just such an orgy of Freudian death drive that, it's like it's living in the bizarro world in the Superman universe, where everything is just upside down, and reason is nowhere to be found.
It's so true. I mean, it is a Freudian death drive. I mean, they can't stop. They have no idea how to drive. I mean, the left right now has no idea how to drive policy forward without spending big bucks.
They don't even know what they're spending on, too.
They don't even know what they're spending on.
Build Back Better isn't even anything.
Yeah.
Right. It's mostly, I mean, it's solar panels, right? From China, of all people. But I mean, when you all say that you're pessimistic about the future, I'm a sarcastic optimist. I think they're on their last leg of social or cultural hegemony. I mean, as a cultural hegemonic power, I mean, we're seeing SNL like not even be funny anymore. Yeah. But when they make jokes about the liberals, it's funny.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I mean, you can't even laugh about Let's Go Brandon anymore about, the liberals being all upset about us making fun of Joe Biden. Like, we've been making fun of Joe Biden for 50 years. Like, of course we're going to keep going. But like now it's serious, right?
I'd agree with that. And yeah, I think there's a lot to say that we are winning,
right,
on that cultural front as far as free speech and pushback and cancel culture and anti-CRT and anti.
Well, you see also a lack of believing in the media right now. Like, I mean, media approval is at an all-time low. I mean, we have story after story coming out, and the media is pushing a narrative, and the general public is just not believing it anymore. So, like, I just think that we're on the last legs of their cultural power, and we're just waiting for the next thing that will come and replace it. That's my personal opinion on it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even if true though, they can do a lot of damage on the way out the door.
Oh, they are, right? Like, we have 10% inflation right now. That hurts people who are wage earners, and they're hurting a lot of the people that they pretend to care about.
Yeah, it's ghastly.
I don't know if we can survive. Right, we have runaway inflation, which we're in the midst of and seeing. Your government is openly lying to you about what is taking place. A media that covers for them and has no interest in investigating the story. It doesn't seem to, like, they all seem to agree that, like, they're not even going to try or start trying or even claw back some semblance of respect and credibility. They're not even there, which is, I mean, that's just astounding to me. That, like, some intelligent person in the room, even could be a dyed-in-the-wool lefty, goes, hey guys, you know what? We may want to critique the president and what's going on, for our own sake, if nothing else. But no, it's not at all. So, I don't know what that economic calamity changes a lot of things, right? A lot of things. Those are dire times, and people start getting desperate if that's the case. And we've lived in such a bountiful society for so long. I don't know how people will react to scarcity, and I don't have, maybe the cultural aspects we are winning, and that's good. And I agree with you, but the pessimism I get more and more each day with the spending.
Younger millennials and Zoomers, I think, are gonna respond in much healthier ways to scarcity than Gen Xers and Boomers. I think that's almost guaranteed. And so I think that's going to be really interesting. It's going to be an opportunity for younger people to actually lead, and to actually, do something valuable, rather than just piss and moan about everything. I mean, pissing and moaning is fair. I mean, I'm just looking at housing prices lately, and talking to some friends out here who are trying to find a home, and and it's if you want a 1,200 square foot house with like 3 tiny bedrooms and no no lot space, no well beyond the 5, nowhere near the ocean, it's still going to be $1.3 million.
Yeah, California is bad, Jeff. Have you ever looked on Zillow over there?
No, I'm not going to curse for our guest here, but why the hell would you? Why would you? I don't even think you're going to California, man. No,
lived in Newport Beach off of Balboa, and what they sold their property for was insane.
Yeah, that's where I'm at right now. Is fairly close to Balboa.
So this has been a great conversation, Justin. And I think we're going to flip over to the regular episode, but we'll continue the real estate conversation. But you know what? This has been so good. You know what? Maybe we'll give a preview to our Patreon viewers. And Kaitlin, what do you think? I think maybe by the end of the week we'll release it to everybody. Give the Patreon folks a heads up. But this is a good one. I think I'd like this episode to go out to folks. But when we do release it, go to patreon.com/RINOpod, only $1 a month for all the Inside the Bubble This Week in Conservatism takes with guests like Justin Lee and others who we'll be inviting on soon. All right, so we're going to head on over to the open episode. Hope you can join us there. Justin, it's been fantastic conversation. This has been, I don't think you're going to get this kind of stuff anywhere else, except for maybe follow him at Justin Dean Lee. Justin Dean Lee.
Yeah.
On Twitter. All right. We'll see you guys next time.